All right, and to the best part, we've got a wonderful speaker tonight. I'm going to pass that off. Willard, you're going to want to do the introduction. I'm so excited to for this next speaker to come up and get the presentation started. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to have Jennifer Jewell here, author of We Sow. And I'm going to read this. So Jennifer Jewell is the host of a national award-winning weekly public radio program and podcast, Cultivating Place, Conversations on Natural History and the Human Impulse to Garden, and president and CEO of a nonprofit, Cultivating Place Foundation, whose mission is to expand and elevate the way we as a culture think and talk about gardening. Jennifer, the author of The Earth in Her Hands, 75 Extraordinary Women Working in the World of Plants, Timber Press 2020, and Under Western Skies, Visionary Gardens from the Rockies to the Pacific Coast, Timber Press May 2021, and What We Sow on Personal Ecology and Cultural Significance of Seeds, Timber Press 2023. Jewell's greatest passion, the empowerment of gardens and the possibility inherent in the intersection between places, environments, cultures, individuals, and gardens that bring them together beautifully for the better of all lives on this generous planet. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to prepare to do slide transition, and we're going to watch a little trailer for Jennifer's upcoming movie.
Let's just say that.
Okay. And so I think, let me just make sure that I'm sharing the audio precisely through the app. But what I'm going to do is I'm also going to put this into the chat so that everybody has this for themselves somewhere.
Student species. Maybe should start it again.
Yeah, let me turn up the
So
volume.
that we don't miss that. That happened to me before, so clearly we need more space right there. No,
Yeah.
some bigger. Gardeners can be a keystone species. Picture the oak, roots stretching deep, canopies wide enough to shelter 1,000 lives across many generations. Bees, butterflies, beetles tracing their branches. Mushrooms threading hidden networks through their roots. Deer in their shade, birds on their limbs, all depending on the oaks. Remove them and the whole system falters, but let them thrive. See them, value them, care for them, and everything around them thrives. For too long, gardeners have been seen only as leisurely or laborers. But in truth, they root culture, they restore land, they nourish life, they are catalysts for change. Some connect, weaving lives together like roots underground. Some transform, plants into fiber, fiber into art, and fields into shelter that grow and sustain local economies. Some root, holding culture in place like sweetgrass holds coastal waterways across the globe. Some protect, creating havens where life can rest, restore, and be reimagined. Some anchor, reclaiming landscapes and restoring whole ecosystems and their people. Some uncover, bringing hidden stories back into the light to inspire the next generation to participate. Some reveal, growing, painting, and weaving the beauty of the sacred presence of nature back into human places and humans back into nature's places. Some nourish, feeding communities the way trees offer fruit year after year, generation after generation. Some mobilize, rallying whole communities to act, and some preserve, saving the seeds of biodiversity, culture, and care for all of our futures. Each one a keystone, each tending connections you can see, and many you cannot, just like the oaks. This is the power of gardeners. Every act of cultivation rippling outward, growing our world better. Gardeners are a keystone species. Witness them, support them, grow us.
So now we'll get started with the presentation. Just see if I can hide these controls real quick.
Okay.
Right. Thank
And
you.
then how do I,
Advance.
yeah,
Just the arrows should get you. There. So just the space bar.
okay, that's great. All right. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that very nice introduction. It's really fabulous to be in a room of native plant enthusiasts in such a vibrant chapter. Not all chapters are that vibrant, and it's really exciting to see one that is. Willard reached out to me early this summer.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, to ask if I would come up and speak, and I think I was right in the middle of finishing the filming of a documentary film that we are working on. It will be released in 2027, and it's kind of a culmination of the last 10 years of work that I have done on my national public radio program and podcast called Cultivating Place. So that was really fun. That's the first time I've ever sat in a room with anyone besides John, my partner, who's with me at the back, to watch the trailer. So that was pretty great. We just finished filming 10 different live recorded interviews with people in their places around the country. And it will hopefully, the goal for me with the film project is to kind of synthesize what the last 10 years of my radio program and podcast have brought into not just my life, but my actual understanding of who gardeners are and what they do in this world at their very best. So we're going to talk a little bit more about all of that. And we're going to focus tonight on my third book, What We Sow, which is what Willard asked me to speak about. So I'm Jennifer Jewell. I'm the host of this program, and there's nothing like having a poor soul have to read all the titles of everything I've done to think to myself, I could make my titles shorter. That would probably be okay. But I started Cultivating Place back in 2016. My presenting sort of home public radio station is North State Public Radio in Chico, California. This program is the outgrowth of a smaller, more locally based program called In a North State Garden. And I started that in 2008 when I first moved to California. And at that point, I had been writing about gardens in a professional way for about 10 years. I am the child of a professional gardening mother and a wildlife biologist father. So you can see their marriage right in the title of my program. And I was raised in a way that perhaps some of you were, and maybe many of you weren't, in which plants were part of everything we did as a family because of what my, am I loud enough? Can people online hear me? No.
They can, they just want volume up.
Okay.
Give me 1 second.
Okay. I'll just wait. Or I'll just bounce. And they'll say we can't hear. Better? There, yeah, is that better for the people online? Please put in the chat. Yeah, I should probably just talk. So, professional gardening mother, wildlife biologist father. Plants were definitely a part of our cultural literacy as a family. And it was just part of who we were. And it was not until I was a little bit older and off to school that I realized that not everybody actually understood plants in this way. And that was really interesting to me. And as I became older, I became more interested in plants, more interested in writing about them. And then I was a young mother and I started writing for big garden publications around the world. And this was about 1998 when I had my first child. And I became more and more frustrated and disenchanted with the way our world talked about gardens and gardeners. And at that time, very especially, it became clear to me that what I was doing as a writer about gardens in some of these venues was actually exacerbating one of the problems that I saw. And for those, how many people in the audience are gardeners, would call themselves a gardener? Okay. How many people have heard the program Cultivating Place? So for the rest of you, you should pull out your phones and I'll show you how to subscribe right now, but we can do that later. What I noticed at this moment in time, and I think it had been true for quite a while, probably since the 1950s, and then increasingly so towards now even, was that there was this increasing diminishment of what the word garden meant and a dismissal of who gardeners were and what they did in this world. And I think this happened for a couple of reasons, but one of them was that confluence of leisure time, leisure activity, middle class, marketing, beautiful pictures in a glossy magazine. And this commodification of what the garden was into a noun that you could sell and you could buy at your big box store this weekend and roll out. And that was not what I understood gardening to be. And it was when two things happened. One was I had a garden editor for one of the magazines I worked at say to me, I can't publish that article because that man has a dirty t-shirt that has a hole in it. And those pictures aren't going to work for this spread. And I thought, well, that man is an elder Japanese bonsai expert, and he's got a historic collection. That is a crazy metric. And that is not how I want to talk about gardening. So and then the second thing that happened was I had somebody say to me just one too many times, well, if you had your way, your children would spend all day in the garden drinking tea, and that is not going to pay the bills or lead them to a great job in life. And I thought to myself, that is exactly what I want my children to be doing for the rest of their lives. That is a great life. And so I started thinking about how do I move the way I think about gardening into something that I also do. And when we moved to California in 2007, I was driving down the road in Chico, California, and there was a radio spot from our local station saying, we need volunteer public service announcement people. And I said, public radio, that is how you talk about gardening, and you get away from this two-dimensional pretty picture that is both beautiful, but also hindering in this way that it contracts what it means. I love a beautiful picture, I love the beautiful pictures you're going to turn in for your Christmas potluck of the plants on the Siskiyou crest and how breathtaking they are. We all love when our gardens look beautiful and you can take that picture and share it with a friend. But is that what your garden looks like 24/7? No, that is not what it looks like 24/7 or 12 months out of the year. That isn't the only reason we are out there dedicated to plants in our places. And so with the radio program, I really strived to move towards a much greater diversity. Wait, we're going to figure this out. I might have to move a cursor.
Oh, yeah.
Just click on it.
Nope, wrong way. There. Okay, now will it work now? Yeah. Okay, so back. And so what I hoped to do with the radio program was just talk about the great diversity of who gardeners are, where they are, and what they are doing, because people have been tending to plants in their places for all of the reasons that we tend to plants in our places now, through all time, across all space, across all cultures, whether they use the word gardener or not. And yet in mainstream United States, by 2007, when I started the radio program, much of what gardening and gardeners had been diminished to looked exactly like me. It looked like middle-aged, middle-class white women on the weekend doing this really sweet activity. It's so cute that you garden on a Saturday, but it's not particularly meaningful or powerful. And I say, no, it's actually as meaningful and powerful as anything you're going to teach your children or you're going to share with the world, no matter what you do, whether you are a doctor or a lawyer or a banker or a professor. Being a gardener is part of an essential cultural literacy in our world as humans on this planet. And so I started the program in 2016 on a national basis. And we're syndicated on stations around the country. And at this point, we've been downloaded about 5 million times. And what that tells me, we're coming up on 500 episodes. What that tells me is not how great the program is. It tells me just how hungry plants people are and gardeners are to talk about this act that we are called to in this way. The other thing that I think we got contracted down into was this idea of how to garden, right? How to do this, how to do that. How many people in the room have been gardening for 5 years? How many have been gardening for 10? How many have been gardening for 20? Okay, I'll just jump up. How many have been gardening for 50? Couple, right? So for those people, more. And more, 50 and more. For those people that have been gardening for 15 to 20 years, do you know everything there is to know about gardening? Right. You've been native plant enthusiasts forever. Do you know everything there is to know about the rare plants of Siskiyous? No, right? We are never going to know all there is to know about gardening. We are never going to know all there is to know about plants. And yet, that, I think, is one of the great gifts of the garden, is that we are perennially students. And so we always are going to need to learn more. But if you've been gardening for 5 to 10 to 15 years, there's only so much how-to you really want to read about. Because if you haven't figured out blossom end rot by now, you maybe aren't going to figure it out, and that's okay. Somebody else can figure it out. And I love the how-to, but I also, that's not all I want to read. And it's not all that I want to talk about as a gardener. And so this is the point of Cultivating Place. And the important part of it is how firmly I believe in the power of gardeners as these powerful intersectional agents and spaces for positive change in our world, as in all kinds of ways, whether it's food sovereignty or community building or economic growth. Those were the themes that you were seeing in the film. And these are the themes that come home to me in all of these interviews that I conduct each week. And so I've been doing this a long time. I come from a family that's fairly literate in these things. I think I know something or even more than something about plants and their ways and the garden world. And then we show up for March of 2020. You guys remember March of 2020, right? So John and I were on the road for a book tour for my very first book, The Earth in Her Hands. And we're in the Northeast, and we get the call that California is shutting down. And we realized that the book tour that we were supposed to be on for the coming 9 weeks was not going to happen, and that we were going to have to get back to California. Our kids were all over the place, so we had to figure out, like, where are the kids? How do we get home? What's going to happen with income and job and la la la. But we're gardeners, and we weren't supposed to be home for 9 weeks in the spring of 2020. So we hadn't put in our spring garden. So we needed to order seeds. We were worried about our kids and airline tickets, but we were also worried about our seeds for the spring because we wanted to plant our greens and all the other things. And so we got online to look for airline tickets, find our kids, and order our seeds. And we got that message that maybe some of you encountered at that same time, which was back ordered, out of stock, not available. And there was this moment that I had of thinking, what is happening with the seed supply that this occurred so quickly in our seed system? And as an intelligent and educated woman who thought she knew quite a bit about the plant world, what I realized right there was I knew very little about seed and seed supply in our world. And that as a knowledgeable and diligent gardener, that was a real lack of responsibility on my part. And that if I was going to call myself a gardener, I should know a whole lot more about where seeds were coming from, who was growing them, what was happening to them, because as any gardener knows, they are an incredibly important part of everything we do. We'll keep going on that. Now, I knew a little bit about them. In writing The Earth in Her Hands, I had interviewed a whole bunch of seed keepers. When I looked back at the first years of the program, I had spent a lot of time interviewing seed keepers. In Under Western Skies, I focused on ecological gardens. Several of them were all ecotype seed-based gardens in their places around the US West. These are some of the seed keepers from The Earth in Her Hands. You will recognize several of them: Vandana Shiva, Ira Wallace, Renee Shepard, Rowan White, Kara Louise, who was the executive director of the Organic Seed Alliance. Do you know who the other people are? Or should I have given their titles? So Rowan White is an indigenous seed keeper based out of Northern California. I'm not supposed to walk away from the mic. Vandana Shiva is an international seed keeper out of India. Ira Wallace is a cultural seed keeper out of the Southeast who works for Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. And Renee Shepard has a well-known vegetable gardening. She's had multiple catalogs and websites, a great seed keeper. And these were just some of the gardens around the US West that were based on ecotype collected seed in Texas, in Colorado, those are two in New Mexico, Colorado, Bay Area. That's the Texas, and that's Dennis Mudd's. Are you all familiar with Dennis Mudd of the California Native Plant Society? So he started his native plant garden out of San Diego, and he was a tech guy who decided he wanted to put in a native plant garden and realized that he didn't know enough about native plants. And he essentially built the structure that became Calscape, that are you familiar with Calscape? And so it's pretty incredible that this one guy who was not a gardener then became a gardener, then built this native plant location finder. And so that's his garden. And so what this all sort of came together for me was, as we went home and I thought about this lack of knowledge on my part, was that I needed to do a little more research just for myself. And I spent the year with John in the canyon outside of Chico, California, starting to do some of the research that would become What We Sow. And it really is the other two books have great photographs. This one does not have any photographs. So just if you were to get it, be prepared for that. And it follows the seasons of what is happening in just the native plant seed shed in Northern California. And then as that is happening, and I am watching different plants form seed, come into seed, disperse seed, I then introduce different topics throughout the rest of the book about what I am learning about the seed world. And one of the first questions you kind of have to ask yourself is, what is seed? There is a simple, biological answer to that question. But when you think about the word seed, it is so capacious and full of symbolism and language usage and importance in our world. Even the way we think about the word seed in the English language is full of metaphor and meaning. And you also have to think about, there is the one seed, and then there is seed as an entire concept. And you can say the word to yourself, and then you can look at one little seed and think, that's really actually crazy that a whole oak tree comes out of this little acorn, right? If you it's one of the things that's so commonplace, especially if you're a gardener, that I think we lose touch with the reverence and the just miraculousness of these structures. And you think about one acorn growing what will become a 250-year-old oak tree, and that one oak tree and the many, many, many lives it shelters, it nourishes, it makes possible over hundreds of generations. That's pretty incredible, right? Seed is miraculous, and I think we forget it. And it is, and I know, I'm sure other people have said this exact thought, but it is essentially what a Messiah is to our religious world, to the plant world, to our life on this planet. Seed is the beginning, and it is the end, and it is the beginning again of all of our ecosystems. It's pretty incredible to think about. It is for me. Besides being miraculous and the beginning and the end in these sort of biggest terms, it is also this incredible gift in common, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about this. And I just want to note that John took both of these pictures. When I travel around the country and I show this picture, how many people here can identify that seed pod structure? Say it louder.
Is it nutmeg?
It's not nutmeg. Nope. It's our pipevine. So it's Aristolochia californica. And it's just the most incredible structure, right? But so I can go to very few audiences in the world who will identify this seed pod for me. But I can go almost anywhere in the country and show this picture, and people will say, oh, right, the milkweed. Oh, right, the buckeye. And that's because there are milkweed species and buckeye species that are native across the US. And they are full of story individually and culturally. They are full of food, and they are full of ecosystem meaning wherever they show up. And that is because the plants on this planet belong to all of us, not just one of us, and not just any one group of us. And so I had to go back and go through the kind of basic high school biology of like, who are the seed-bearing plants? How long have they been here? What did that mean? I am, of course, sharing this with people who know this information, but in doing this research, it was incredible to read reports in which something like 30% of graduating high school seniors could not identify where seed was on some very common plants. And it reminds you that for those of us who are in the plant world, it is not a green blur out there. But for a lot of the world, it is a green blur out there. And in our sort of academic and plant passion, it's kind of the mandate for us to not leave the rest of the world out or behind in this kind of knowledge, whether that is in school policy, whether that is in public policy, whether that is in our native plant invitations to who joins and how we get them to join and share this information. As you might remember, so the spermatophytes are all the seed-bearing plants. The gymnosperms are, basically the conifers. They evolved about 350 million years ago. There are about 1,000 extant species. The angiosperms, which is like the sweet spot for the gardeners because they have the flowers, evolved about 100 million years ago, and there are 300,000 species. They constitute 80% of the whole plant kingdom. Okay, now I like spew those numbers off, right? But look at them again. 350 million years, 300,000 species. How many species are in this room? There's probably more than one, but the one that's in the audience, I think we forget sometimes that we are a single species on a planet that is covered in species. And they have been here a lot longer than us, and they have a lot to teach us. And those numbers are pretty incredible, and they remind us that one, we are never alone, and two, we always have more to learn. And it is important, I think, for me as a gardener to remind myself about humility and open-mindedness. And the importance of partnering with these other lives, because when we engage with seed, we are engaging with the essence of life on this planet. When you talk about earth, fire, water, air being the four primary elements, unless you add seed to that formula, you do not have a habitable planet for us, let alone an incredibly beautiful, delicious, and pleasurable planet. I had to go back and remind myself about the basics of pollination ecology, the importance of wind, water, and wildlife, the importance of collaborating and cooperating between the plant's knowledge and evolution and that of all the other forces around them, including the other species, as well as the climate. The general carpology of seeds. And this was a photo I took very quickly after I moved to California. I keep wanting to wander away. And an old professor of biology at California State University, Chico, took us on a native plant hike. And he took one of our gray pine cones and he kind of knocked it on the ground and the little seeds fell out. And I was like, right, that's right. Like pine nuts actually come out of a pine cone, right? You sometimes forget these things. It sounds so basic, and then he cut open that pine nut and he showed me, what is essentially the embryo, and it looks like a little pine tree. Like you can see the shape of the pine tree in this pine nut. And it was one of those moments of like, that is so cool. That is so cool. And we forget that. the basic anatomy of seed and the fact that it comes with everything that it needs to go out into the world and make a life. And then dispersal ecology, which is one of the coolest parts of seed world. Again, it's all about evolution and coevolution and adapting to wind, water, propulsion, one of the coolest dispersal techniques for the seeds, which is, where, I'm sure you all know this, but I'm just going to say it anyway because it's so cool. Where the seed gets so much tension inside of it as it dries and dehisces along the different seams of the structure. So this is a violet. And most seeds have at least two different dispersal techniques because they are smart and have been here a long time. You don't want to just rely on one mode. And their second mode, if it's not an ant who gets in there and eats and opens the seed pod, they get so tight and then contract that they just go and then it blows away. And there's great research on the different propulsive seed dispersals in different species and how far that little seed pod can actually propel their seed out so that it gets far enough away from the mother plant to not compete, to not build up all kinds of bacteria or diseases, and creates a better life for the future. Gravity and wildlife. And again, this is a reminder that we never do anything alone. We always are doing something in concert with another life. And I think sometimes, again, as gardeners, someone will walk into your garden and say, "Oh, your garden is so beautiful. You've done so much work." And it's good to remember that you did not do that by yourself. The plants definitely helped you. The study of dormancy and germination were some of the most fun parts of this research, and were, again, these places where, as I interviewed seed keepers from around the country, including the head of there's a long fancy name for it, but essentially it's the U.S. Germplasm Seed Bank out of Fort Collins, Colorado, Dr. Stephanie Green and Christina Walters. They were talking about how many of the native plants around the planet, we still don't really understand the full dormancy and stimulus for germination that goes on with them. And some of the research coming out, like still all these centuries we've been studying this as humans and recording it, we still don't know the answers. And they had just, when I was interviewing them, they had just started to implement some of the new research coming out of Australia, in which they recognized that it wasn't just fire that fire-loving plants were responding to in germination, but it was smoke. Not just smoke in the air, but also smoke in the water. From raindrops, from puddles, from standing surface water, and how they were then adapting the smoke tablets to add to water in order to water these seeds in fire areas in order to improve restoration results. It was pretty cool to have, and I think it was Stephanie Green who said to me, seeds are just really like part science, but mostly magic. And I was like, that's pretty cool to have a scientist of the highest caliber still believe in the magic of her work. And, and still you can know all of this morphology, all of this phenology, and you still have to say, but what is seed? Because it's even bigger than that. It is the incredible magic of a barren landscape having finally a good year of rain and just bursting into a super bloom because the seed is lying there in the seed bank waiting for this moment, sometimes for years. It is the basis of all the ecosystems on our planet and their incredible diversity. My place in Northern California being one of those great hotspots, yours here in Southern Oregon being among them also. Granted, we're not that far apart, but still, it's incredible. And you still then have to say, but what is seed in the hands of humans? What is it as a result of the hands of humans? And what I came to recognize after these 2 years of research and writing of this book was that there's really two stories here as a result of the human hand. And one is one of the most incredible love stories you will ever read about how humans have partnered with seed and seed has companioned these humans across cultural epochs and created really the survival necessary for different human groups in places all over the planet. And in other cases, it's one of the like great tragedies to see what the modern age has done with seed, how and why, and to what end. And this part was really hard to go through because the love story part will you all recognize as plants people. Our partnering with seed, our selecting seed, our finding seed, our sharing seed, our even hybridizing seed in many ways has led to our favorite fruits, our favorite foods, our favorite flowers. We use these not just to eat, but to pray, to light candles, to create ritual. We're about to come up to one of the big food events of the year in the United States. And a lot of that is based on plant food that we love and we have loved for centuries. Those different varieties of potatoes and what are the little green things? Brussels sprouts, and cranberries and all the rest. These have been altered by humans wherever we find them. It is the history of the seed industry and all kinds of innovation and independence and people following their passions. There are super cool collections of historic catalogs from around the world. They are housed in different places. One of them is at the University of Oregon. One of them is in John's basement. Don't tell anybody else that. But it was really interesting to read through some of these catalogs, to interview some of these librarians who hold these collections, and to see that you can actually trace the history of agriculture, the history of technology and innovation, the history of cultural change in the United States through these seed catalogs alone. Like, this is the kind of lens that plants and our relationship to them offer us. For instance, I'm going to walk away from the microphone for a second. See this catalog out of Sacramento? And you see the year on that catalog, 1941. And do you recognize the symbology of this Japanese iconic symbol? You wouldn't see that again after 1942. And there were a lot of interesting changes as you read through these. And you think about seed and us, and you think about seed banking. And of course, seed banking as a concept comes back to the natural concept first, right? It's the bank in the soil. And so this is a picture of our property or near our property right after the campfire in 2018. And in some places it burned so hot, and you all come from fire country, you know what this is like, that we worried that the ground was sterilized. It was devastating. And yet fire, like seed, is a part of life, and especially where we live. And despite our trauma, the land knew exactly what to do, and it began to regenerate. So the campfire kicked off on November 8th, and by Thanksgiving, this was already, even before Thanksgiving, this was already happening because we finally got rain. But what's interesting here, it's two-part. And it speaks to both the love story and the tragedy. And that is that this was one of the most amazing greenings of a landscape. And still, when I talk about it, I get a little choked up because it was so dark. And to see that green come out was miraculous. And of course, that's not all native plants, right? A lot of that germinating right there is the burden of invasive plants that we as gardeners are in large part responsible for bringing to the landscapes wherever we go. And so again, this is a reminder that seed is so powerful. It is powerful in its positive. It is powerful in its capacity for being destructive. And it is the mandate for us then, as people engaging with it, to do so with the utmost respect and the utmost knowledge. Every seed keeper that I spoke to from around the world came back to the importance of the conservation of seed in its place where it belongs first. That is the primary mandate. The secondary mandate are all of the backups that we have developed over time. And these include all of the seed banking that have taken place in our world. I'm going too fast now, getting all excited with the working cursor. Seed banking goes back to official, recorded, kind of institution level seed banking. Goes back to kind of the late 1800s, where the Vavilov Institute for Seeds Research started in Russia. That was the first institutional. Of course, all cultures have always banked their seed for all the reasons that you do, for the future and for next year. The first big one was the Vavilov Institute in Russia. We have so many different kinds of seed banks across the US at this point, including a lot of native. Original seed banking was basically human food. That was the importance, was to save all the seed of the important food crops. That still is by and large the main criteria for the biggest seed banks, is human food, in the importance of saving it. But as our times have developed and biodiversity is being lost and habitats are being lost, and we understand the importance of that, more and more seed banks are based on native seed for restoration purposes. And this is one of those funny scenes in the research where you recognize that we have siloed ourselves in so many ways. There are the flower people over here. There are the food people over here. There are the crazy puritanical native seed people over here. And, there are these other seed people over here. But when it comes down to it, all of our food came from native plants, right? All of our food was developed from a native plant somewhere. And those very, very important native plant progenitors of what are our current crops, they are what we go back to when we have a failure in a food crop now because of disease, because of genetics, because of loss. It's the native plant progenitors that can help refresh the genetics for now. There's a great story that is in the research about 3,000-year-old date palm seeds being found in one of the Egyptian tombs. And there's another story about another one that was actually turned out to be fake. This one is actually real. They were really 3,000, rodents hadn't brought them in later. Really 3,000-year-old date palms. And they were found and they were germinated. And when they germinated, they were able to actually cross. There are males and females. They were actually able to cross the old ones with the old ones, but they were actually able to cross the old ones with new ones as well to create some new genetic lines. But that's pretty amazing to be dormant for 3,000 years and germinate with ease. This is one of the great native plant seed banks in the US out of the Chicago Botanic Garden, which is working to save and conserve all of the different species from the entire tall grass prairie ecosystem, which sort of stretches from Canada all the way down to southern Texas. I don't think it goes exactly into Mexico. But they are, and of course, we have one of the great ones in the California Botanic Garden as well. And of course, the mothership, and no publisher had the money to send me to Svalbard, which was really sad because I would love to go and see Svalbard. But this is the mothership of seed banking in the world. And it is also this beautiful story of collaboration between organizations across the whole planet who normally do not collaborate or play well together. And they did in this instance. Svalbard is unlike any other seed bank in the country, in the world, in that most seed banks are banking a specific region and they are in that region, right? So whether it's the California Botanic Seed Garden or the Chicago or Icarta, whichever, this one does not represent any one region or ecosystem. It is just a repository for the backup seeds of other collections. And almost all collections across the world, there's something like 1,500 institutional seed banks in the world today. They have a backup copy of almost all of them. Interestingly, the United States is not well represented there because we have a system of redundancy in the US as it exists anyway. So we didn't have the same kind of urgency to be part of Svalbard, but there are smaller groups like Seed Savers Exchange that are represented at Svalbard. And the technology being used to make sure, and it is great to talk to like the head of the Q Millennial Seed Bank, and have him say to me, the technology for saving seeds is pretty much what it has been for the last 100,000 years. You want them dry, you want them cool, you want them dark. So it could be a mason jar in your basement, but we've improved it a little bit. So the amount of dryness that you want so that it's dry but not dead, and the amount of dark and the amount of cold, like just how cold can you keep them to improve their longevity. It's pretty interesting. And of course, one of the greatest seed banks are home gardeners and gardeners per se around the world who have crazy seed drawers like this, essentially conserving a great biodiversity. The really important thread of small independent seed growers and keepers, at least two of whom are represented in your region right here, are an incredibly important part to conserving the biodiversity of seed as we know it right now. And one of the things that became apparent to me was when I asked other gardeners, well, where did you buy your seed this year? And they're like, oh, I picked up some, like there was something on sale at the front door at Costco or Lowe's or Home Depot, and even those people who said, oh, I only shop at the like really good independent organic seed growers, they didn't know where those seeds had come from. Like not all seed sellers grow their own seed. They source their seed from a variety of sources, whether it's like a network of growers. And that's the kind of question we should all be asking, along with, was it treated with something? Was it, does it have any neonicotinoids involved in it in any way? If we do not ask the questions, we cannot know the answers. If we don't know the answers, we still can't claim ignorance. Ignorance is not a defense for continuing a system of consolidation and degradation that is definitely taking place in our world. One of the things that became apparent, and I don't think I have the slide here. I'm not really sure why I've lost the slide, but if you were to look at a graph of all of the largest owners of seed in the US over the last 20 years, you would see that it goes from a population of like 150 different bubbles of people that own different aspects of the seed industry down to six. Six major players own something like 85% of all commercial seed in the world today. Those 6 institutions are pharmaceutical and petrochemical companies. Now just think about that for a second. Pharmaceutical and petrochemical companies are in charge of the decisions being made about our food seed supply across the planet. That seems like a strange combination, doesn't it? I think it does, and I think it's up to us as the people who eat that food, buy that food, and sow those seeds to ask a whole lot more questions and know their answers and lobby for something different. The other really interesting thing was this incredible resurgence of native seed for restoration that has really come along in the last 10, 15 years, specifically as they were built, we as a country are building, and not just our country, around the world, building out structures to try and hit the 30 by 30 initiatives for how much land has been conserved and restored with environmentally appropriate, regionally specific seed supply. These are some pictures coming out of heritage seed growers in Northern California who have supplied a lot of seed for the restoration across the Northern California area. And even I think some of Southern Oregon, they did a lot for the Klamath River restoration. The other really important, really fun line of research here were seed libraries across the country. Now there are the first seed library was developed in the late 1990s in actually Gardner, New York, by a man named Ken Green, who was an artist who went on to found Hudson Valley Seeds. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They have like the very cool art packs. You should look it up. You would love them. Hudson Valley Seeds, mostly vegetables, flowers, they do native plants for the Northeast. We now have something like 1,500 seed libraries across the United States. And what's so fun about these seed libraries is they really take that democratic ideal of a library and they apply it to seed, meaning that it is open source. It is available for anybody and everybody to come in, take out, and bring back if they are able, which comes with a lot of education and community building at the exact same time. And I just love this propaganda poster from one of the seed keepers named Jeff Quattrone, who started a series of 6 different seed banks across New Jersey. He has single-handedly revived the seed lines of 6 different New Jersey specific hybrid tomatoes. Okay, so just think about how niche that is. Who knew that New Jersey had such a history and culture with different tomatoes? But they do. And he is a big believer in power to the seed people. So there are all of these challenges that are facing seed in our world, all different kinds of seed, from home growers to industrial seed. The agricultural commodity nature of how we grow food in the US is one of them. The petrochemical industry is another one of them. And this is just some of the information on the pesticide coated seeds in our world. There was information out of the Environmental Protection Agency indicating that there were like 97% of all corn grown in the US today is grown as a pesticide coated seed. And it is with the sort of Roundup Ready, but there are other names for it. And God bless Rachel Carson for getting DDT banned for us. But the fact is that we cannot ban one chemical at a time. We have to change our mindset because at this point, there are something like 18,000 different active pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, or as Rachel Carson would call them, biocides, because they just simply kill life that are available to us 24/7 with very little regulation in almost every hardware store and grocery store you walk into today. They are less regulated than almost anything in the country. We have to change our mindset if we want to change that truth. And the fact is that these challenges also come with the solutions, because if we are a part of the problem, we are also part of the solution. And those solutions are many, and there are so many people on the ground, several of them, again, right here with Siskiyou Rare Seeds, with the Herb Farm, with the Native Plant Societies that are all working on ground level solutions and pathways to better cared for seed. As one of the seed keepers said to me, the bigger the mainstream, the more room there is for a really healthy undercurrent. That is where we can make a difference. And each of those pathways is populated with people who are dedicating their lives to working on improved seed and seed supply and seed integrity and seed policy in the US and around the world. And this is just a handful of those that I have interviewed for the book and in the podcast. Each one of these people, so this is Naomi Frega of the California Botanic Garden. That is Owen Smith of True Love Seeds out of Philadelphia. That's Jeff Quattrone. That's Kelly Matsushita Seng of Second Generation Seeds, which is a whole network of seed keepers focused just on the seeds of the Asian diaspora and keeping them regenerated and shared and growing out around along the West Coast. That is the native seed project out of Maine, who are working on the native seed supply for the native plants in our garden so that they don't just become a genetic monopoly of clones that are not helping with biodiversity if they are all cloned or tissue cultured to meet our demand. That's Ken Green of Hudson Valley Seeds. So, you come back to that corn piece of information and you think about the history of cultures across North America who have partnered with corn as a sacred element, if not relative, if not ancestor and future in their cosmology, right? You think about the Native American people or the indigenous people further south who see corn as that one plant group that has been the most important for the survival of their culture across time. And then you think about it being turned into a commodity covered with pesticides and sold as a commodity. You cannot really get to more different world views than that. And that's a pretty stark thought as gardeners and seed keepers and plant lovers ourselves. Where do we fall, not only in what we say we believe, but in how we act with how we garden, how we spend our dollars, how we spend our policy. This was one of the most moving seed keeper interviews that I conducted over the last 10 years. And this is Vivian Sansour, who is the founder of the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library. And if anyone can think about trying times, Vivian would be one of them. And she said to me, these are trying times, but they are also opportune times, calling on us to ask ourselves, how mediocre or brave do we want to be? How mediocre or how brave do we want to be? And I will tell you, we have mediocre down. We are really good at mediocre. We are drying and disturbing our planet at an incredible, unprecedented rate. We have mediocre and worse down pat. And yet, we know we can do better. And if there is any population of people in the United States or in the world who knows we can do better, it is us as gardeners. It is us as plants people that know that. You look at this default landscape in the United States today, and if this is our landscape that is the default, no matter where you go, and we go everywhere in the United States, John and I talking to people, and this could be anywhere in the US, right? But here's the hope right here, right? There is this one gardener who is slowly starting to inoculate at least this garden, right? And so we know we can do better. And if that default persists, we are lost as a species, literally and figuratively, certainly existentially. We don't know where we live. We don't know who we are. And we can do better. We can be this beautiful, biodiverse, and brave, this beautiful garden in, let's see, Roy Diblick, I think we're in Nebraska. This one on the top of a windy slope above Santa Fe, New Mexico. We can be this beautiful, biodiverse, and brave as the biodiversity and the love of it on the Siskiyou Crest. We can be as beautiful, biodiverse, and brave as the Siskiyou chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon, who, as one of 3 founding organizations in the state, kicked off what is now a statewide love of native plants and their research and preservation. Rachel Whirling, thank you for your photos from the website. We can be this beautiful, biodiverse, and brave, and it's the gardeners among us who know that. I love this propaganda piece because this is right. That sunflower is everything. It is food, it is economy, it is culture, it is very continent specific. And how he used this into the power of the plant people motto is something just beautiful, because our gardens are not just pretty places. Our gardens are not just our places. When we do it right, our gardens are moral and social contracts that we sign with the place around us, that we will do our best. In my definition of a gardener, we are people tending to plants in our place for the best interest of all 3, the people, the plants, and the place. And if we can hold that definition in mind, whether we are growing flowers or food or native plants for the birds and the biodiversity of our place, then we are a moral compass, and we are a keystone species. Now, I know most garden talks, you like to take notes and write down all the plants, and I am not that kind of talk, but here is your list. And I thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to be here.
So thank you very, very much. And I'll open up the question and you can stay here if you want. So
Yes.
Was the reason we took birds in 2020 to people panic buying, or?
I think it was a combination of things. One was a panic buying. 2 was that the smallest of our seed sellers did not have the capacity for the amount of orders that were coming in. The third one was that they didn't have the physical resources to both distance and keep people safe and pack up their seeds, because they just didn't have that kind of space. But the fourth one, which was the interesting one in the book, was this all of a sudden visibility of the fact that many of our smaller independent seed growers are sourcing some of their most common seed from just a handful of people. So that got cut off if that supplier couldn't pack and ship their seed or couldn't harvest their seed, and then the seed supply coming out of different continents, because at this point our food seed, like, our carrots and our spinach and it is so multinational now because it's easier to grow seed for the crops that are going to be sold in the spring in a climate that is further away and can grow that seed and harvest it at the same time. But then that turned into a supply chain issue of shipping and the stopping of that. So the big companies had those issues and the little companies had space and capacity issues. Yeah.
What is the philosophy behind plants in your own garden? Or direction?
So I am a huge believer in exactly what I said about the importance of a garden being, most gardens that I encounter have all of these different stories, right? They have a story of a place, but they also have a story of a person. So that means that the garden, the plants in my garden and in the garden that John and I share are everything. We have flowers, we have old ones, we have new ones, we have a lot of native ones, we have a lot of non-native ones, and they all generally come with a story. Like, we collected that seed at Mount Ashland, or, that came from the neighbor who lived next to John in Fair Oaks in the 1950s, or and that to me is the fun. One of the things I think that's true as I sort of explore this idea of gardeners being a keystone species and the importance of us living up to that concept, is that I think we're actually doing a pretty good job on the environmental biodiversity and native plant front. It feels glacial, I know. And you see that picture of suburbia and you're like, we are not making enough progress fast enough. But cast your mind back 20 years. It was a very different world 20 years ago in terms of native plant supply, native plant awareness. And so I think we are actually making our greatest progress there. This idea that we actually are, the statistics say that, or the research that I have looked at tells us that prior to the pandemic, there were something like 46% of all US households identified as being engaged in gardening. Post-pandemic, anybody know or want to hazard a guess? A lot, right? It went up to 75%. That's almost 100 million households engaged in gardening. So if we can, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are organic gardening or native plant gardening or, and it's a spectrum. Like, we have to grow people up into being in these roles culturally, economically, environmentally, spiritually, whatever it might be. But I think it's important that we don't close any one door. And I say that from my own experience of, I want to plant a lot of native plants, but if you tell me to take out my old garden roses, it's not going to happen. I love them too much. They are my dead mother to me. And so, and people care about their gardens this much and their plants this much. And I think we need to have as many access points as possible to let people find their love of plants and then teach them or be partners with them or companion them along the journey that we've all been on in our lives. Because you don't start out as a keystone species, you have to grow into being that. Yeah, and I think there are just so many access points for people to find their way with their plant love, because we all rely on them whether we know it or not. So I just answered like 12 questions that you didn't ask, but that's okay. Julie.
I remember back it seems so long ago now, when the village was so busy that the Fort Collins Food Bank had its funding slashed. You know what I'm thinking of that?
I believe they have still had their funding slashed, and they still have a lot of people who were let go. What I don't know is what that has done to the capacity of the holdings. The first thing that's going to go, which was already struggling when I was interviewing them in 21 and 22, was that they weren't growing out as often as they needed to. Like that seemed to be the sticking point for most of the big seed banks in the world was, because a lot of them are in places that experience all kinds of trouble. Like I'm sure most of you heard about the Syrian war causing the bombing of the seed bank in Aleppo, which then killed that seed bank and they had to disperse. Luckily, they had banked up. They had sent their collection as a backup to Svalbard, and this is where Svalbard made its importance apparent immediately, and they were able to regenerate the seed bank. But most seed banks don't have enough people or place or money or time to actually do their grow outs the way that they know they would prefer to do them. And so they're gambling on that. So yeah. I don't know. That's the answer to your question. I don't know what's happened. But I do think that because Fort Collins is a backup for the collections that have been made in all the different sub collecting areas, is that I think we have enough redundancy that people aren't terrified about a little bit of, not a little bit, but about shortfall in Fort Collins. That was the sense that I got. Lucretia.
So when you're traveling around, I'm curious just to pick one chemical, neonics.
That's a class. That's a whole class.
Right, that group of things, that's, no. Are you seeing, people talking about it, making progress with it, addressing it?
Yes. Yes and no, because it's a really uphill battle because it is so, and this became clear through a lot of the research, is that the things we don't know about the seed, especially at the sort of petrochemical industrial level, what we don't know is often, it seems, designed so that we don't know it. So the application of neonicotinoids onto seedlings or seeds is so prevalent and so obscured that we don't even know it. I had a friend who went to buy, she was so excited when Home Depot started to introduce the native plant line. And she went and got a bunch of native plants. She unpackaged them and slipped down into the side of the package was a little tiny white tab that was not visible until you took the plant out of the little container that said this plant has been treated with neonicotinoids. And then there was a little skull and crossbone. And then she didn't even know what to do. Like, what do you do with this plant now that should be taken to essentially hazardous waste? And then there was a terrible report from the Xerces Society in which there wasn't, I think, am I right, John, when I say there wasn't a single incidence of a milkweed plant from a commercial source tested across the country that did not show evidence of neonicotinoids in the plant. These are the whole point is to, people want to help. They want to plant milkweeds. They want to feed the monarchs. And then we are serving them neonicotinoids. So I think with, groups like the native plant societies across the country, whether it's California or Oregon or Texas or Florida, there's a lot more awareness about it. And I think with big groups like Xerces, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I don't think we're going to make any progress at a federal level for the next couple of years, but I think different states are taking this on very seriously. I think Colorado and New Mexico are two of them that have just made a lot of progress with banning and labeling, and that right there is hopeful.
And I was told, I was in Corvallis at the Master Gardener, Master Gardener, a fellow was presenting on their nursery and being neonic free. And he said, we had to do it because our clients demanded it of us.
And that's right there, right?
That's heartening.
Really, really heartening. And you sometimes feel like, well, what can I do? But the fact is, as 100 million households, if we even got 2/3 of that group or a third of that group to ask that question at every nursery they go to. Like, it's our dollars that are funding this industry. If we remove our dollars, the industry will change. We know this. So it is talking, it is sharing, it is trying not to finger wag. It is, trying to make people aware. And it's as simple, Julie Kierstead is very generously hosting us, and she has a beautiful front garden. She's been here in Ashland for 5 years, and she was talking about people walking by her garden all the time and saying, I am so grateful for your garden. It's so beautiful. I love it. And it's just those moments where someone walks by and you can say, oh yeah, look, I have hawk moths coming to the garden this evening, and pointing out what they are, and then pointing out that when they're struggling with those tomato hornworms, like, that is the hawk moth. And so if you make the connection, then all of a sudden it becomes a very different narrative for these people who just didn't know it, and or heard it once and forgot. And that's why I think it's the mandate for the people who do know it and do love it to share that love.
One question online.
Should I read it?
Yeah.
Should I put on glasses? Yes, please. Has the film been released? No. So the film, that gooey mess that's inside of the chrysalis of a butterfly, that is where the film is right now. We have days and days and days. I think so if we have 10 sites, we probably have 30 days of film. And we are working on putting it together into what will, I think, probably be a docu-series of these 10 sites, and what each of these 10 sites kind of illustrates or illuminates about what I believe to be true of gardeners in our world today, based on 10 years of interviews. And so I am hoping it will be released in 2027. We have the what? Well, as a matter of fact, when you told me it was an annual meeting, I thought, well, that would be nice. What are the dates of your annual meeting? Do you know?
No.
In the spring, okay.
Here is some.
Okay, good to know, good to know. So we are aiming for 2007. We do have an intent to distribute from PBS, but we are also working on other thoughts, and I am as excited as you are as to what it will become. So thanks very much. Okay, appreciate it. And you should get your little bamboo sticker.
Well, thank you, everybody online, and we are going to end the Zoom. So see you guys in January, because the next meeting will be live. Thank you.